All right. Hello to everyone from Workschool. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have with us Meaghan Casey. Meaghan is a really interesting person in this space of edtech. She's an Amazon person, so we should have a lot of fun today, and we're looking forward to it. Meaghan, why don't you give us a brief background of who you are in your journey and tell us some more stuff about what you're going to talk about and today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Glenn, for having me. And it's great to meet all of those who are tuning in. Thank you. Like Glenn said, I work at Amazon Web Services, AWS. I'm a global startup partner manager there. So I work with fast-growing technology startups every day. I get to be inspired by how they're disrupting the world around us and get to work with a large variety of startups. Um, you know, Glenn, I think I would like to share a little bit about my background because it led us to the topic today, which is imposter syndrome. My background and my career really was not linear. And I know a lot of folks tuning in today are young professionals, perhaps just starting your career. So hopefully you find that reassuring. So something that I did in my career was every job that I had or work experience that I had, I tried to follow the topic or the theme that interested me most to find my next role. And I didn't always know if it was going to work out, but it kept me curious and it kept me learning, and it allowed me to try a lot of different things in my career and ultimately land to where I am now. So just a quick recap of my own journey is I started as a management consultant in Washington, D.C. And one of my last projects that I did was a global agricultural project. I got super interested in how all different countries were shipping their agricultural products to the US. And I ended up leaving management consulting in order to pursue more global work. And I started at a nonprofit, and we did work across several countries in Africa and a lot of work in India with the Gates Foundation doing innovative healthcare projects. And I knew it was interesting to me, but I wanted to get even closer to the work and the impact. So for my next job, I chose to take a big risk and I moved to Mumbai, India. And I worked firsthand with social impact entrepreneurs. And that was the first time that I ever worked with entrepreneurs and startups, and I've never looked back. So the rest of my career since that day of landing in India and getting to meet entrepreneurs who are bold and driven, sometimes crazy, to pursue their vision against all odds. I was so inspired by that's been my work ever since. So I went back and got my MBA in order to better learn how to build a business and work better in supporting entrepreneurs and new businesses. I worked at a high-tech startup in Tel Aviv in Israel. I moved to San Francisco to work at Microsoft so I could continue to work with startups in software companies and in technology. And then I moved to South Africa, where I ran a co-working space for entrepreneurs. We did an innovation lab, an incubator, and we also had a co-working space. So I got to meet with and work with many entrepreneurs during my time in Johannesburg in South Africa. And then today, the job that I have at Amazon Web Services is based in New York. And on a daily basis, I come across, tens of startups weekly that I get to work with and help grow through Amazon Web Services. So the big theme that came out ultimately was entrepreneurship, startups, and innovation through technology. But I never would have known that starting my career. I just kept following where my curiosity led me. So despite some risks. So I encourage you all to do the same. And in this journey, there were so many times that I experienced self-doubt. And I wondered if I knew enough or had enough credibility or had enough experience to take that new job. And I learned about imposter syndrome, and it's something that affected me greatly. And by learning to overcome imposter syndrome, I've had a much more fulfilling career. And I'd like to teach you all today what imposter syndrome is, how to overcome it so that you can also have your most fulfilling, successful professional career in the long run. I'm going to walk us through a presentation, but quickly before I do, one of the reasons I love talking about imposter syndrome so much is that when you talk about imposter syndrome, you're going to find that you're in extremely good company. Some of the folks that have talked openly about facing imposter syndrome include the famed literary author, famous literary giant, Maya Angelou. And I actually want to read a quote from her. I mean, incredible author, famed, outstandingly recognized globally. And this is a direct quote from Maya Angelou. Each time I write a book, every time I face that yellow pad, the challenge is so great. I have written 11 books, but each time I think, uh-oh, they're going to find me out. I've run a game on everybody, and they're going to find me out. So to know that even Maya Angelou faced self-doubt, and then I looked up many others. Neil Armstrong, the first man to walk on the moon, faced imposter syndrome and self-doubt head on. And another example that's very close to my tech world, one of the co-founders and co-CEO of Atlassian, which is a large tech startup, very successful. They started in 2001 with 2 student friends, and they've now grown to be valued at over $50 billion. Both founders are billionaires, successfully running Atlassian, their tech company. That one of the co-founders, Mike Cannon-Brookes, he has an entire TED Talk that's dedicated to how he faced imposter syndrome head on, that I highly recommend others listen to. So it's very reassuring to know if you face self-doubt and imposter syndrome, you're in extremely good company with incredibly accomplished individuals. So I'd like to, Glenn, if it's okay, take us through a short presentation.
Yes, thank you so much, Casey, for that overview. That was great. Thank you so much. I should actually take a look at that Maya Angelou quote. That's very inspiring, frankly. I think we all at some point have actually had our own small imposter syndrome and just find ways and motivation to work through. So thank you so much. Yes, you want to share with us a basic presentation, that would be great. Please, we would be excited to see your presentation on this factor.
Okay, so this presentation is all about you in the audience. Most of you are young professionals. You've maybe had a few jobs before, or even are starting your first job in the market. So this is really all about you understanding imposter syndrome and how to overcome it. And I'm going to teach you 3 concrete ways and tactics that you can overcome imposter syndrome so that you and your career and your success can continue to flourish even when you have moments of self-doubt. So first, it's important to understand what imposter syndrome is. It's the feeling that you're in over your head. Probably most of you have had this before, even when you've just taken a class on a new topic that you weren't familiar with yet. You especially have this when you start a new job. You feel like a fraud. Did they really mean to hire me? There's so many people that are more accomplished or have more credentials than I do. Should I really be the person that they picked for this role? I don't know what I'm doing. With any new job, there's new tasks and activities that you've never done before. And trying them for the first time can feel like you have not a clue the right way to go about it. And just in general, having the feeling like someone's going to find you out or call you out for not already being an expert in what you do. But no one starts off as an expert. When you have these feelings and have these thoughts, it's imposter syndrome. And if you let imposter syndrome win, it will look like you running into a brick wall, stopping you in your tracks, stopping you from taking on new challenges that are going to progress your career ultimately. Here are some of the signs. So please take notes so that you can notice when imposter syndrome is popping up for you in your own career. One of the first signs is you're a perfectionist. You don't want to share your project with your manager until it's absolutely perfect. You don't want to get feedback on your project until every I is dotted and every T is crossed. It's good to have high standards, but what's even better is sharing things early with people because you'll never get to 100% perfect product. The second sign that you're facing imposter syndrome is that you're very adverse to taking a risk. You're worried that you're going to fail, so you want to avoid taking on that activity altogether. Another red flag is having those thoughts in your head that you don't know if you're qualified or credible. You don't know if you're cut out to take on this new task or activity. You're worried about your ability to complete it well. And worst of all, you avoid certain tasks altogether because you don't feel comfortable completing them yet. So I had this, for example, when I was the CEO of Impact Hub Johannesburg. I had never done my own financials before. So I wanted to avoid doing the profit and loss statements and financial statements for as long as possible because I didn't feel ready. That caused a big risk for me and my business. So avoiding tasks that you don't feel comfortable with is you hitting a brick wall in progressing your career. It slows you down on your professional journey, but it doesn't have to. So I'm going to teach you 3 steps that you can take to overcome imposter syndrome at any time. The first step is as soon as you see one of those red flags, you name it. You embrace that imposter syndrome has reared its head and has signaled to you that you are about to take on a new challenge or learn a new skill. And instead of being afraid of this new task, you instead can get curious and get excited. There have been studies, I'm public speaking right now, that when people are afraid, for example, afraid of public speaking, their palms will get sweaty and their stomach will tie up in knots. These are signals of fear, but they can also be indications of excitement. You're about to step onto that roller coaster you love and experience the thrill of riding the roller coaster, and you have sweaty palms and a stomach tied in knots, but you're not so much afraid as you are excited. So if you can understand what's going on in your head and reframe your fear as something that you're curious about, am I taking on a new challenge? Am I stretching myself? Am I learning a new skill? Or reframe your fear as I'm excited to take on this new challenge and learn a new skill, even though I know it's going to be difficult and it's going to stretch me. You've gotten on top of imposter syndrome instead of being blocked by it. Then the third step to totally overcome it is to take that step forward, take any action to move forward. So when you take these 3 steps, embrace it, be curious about it, and take an action, the action you take is going to look like, instead of waiting till everything's perfect and not launching a new business for 2 years until it's absolutely perfect, it looks like you doing an experiment that week or the next day. Maybe selling a small, simple version of your product to folks in the neighborhood and getting their feedback. So instead of being a perfectionist, you're willing to take an experiment and learn from the results. Instead of being adverse to risk, you're willing to take a risk. You name, hey, this may not work, but I'd like to get the results and see what I can learn from taking this experiment. Instead of your thoughts being all about doubt and you're not ready, you can reframe it as being a humble leader. So by overcoming imposter syndrome, you are being a leader. You're being a role model to others and a role model to yourself. And you can do that with humility. Hey, I've never done financial statements before, but I know it's important for the business and I'm going to work on it. And I can even let other people know this is the first time I'm doing this. So I'd love to get your feedback and support as we figure out how to do the financial statements correctly. And lastly, instead of avoiding a task like those financial statements, you can ask others for help and you can build a team around you. You can have a coworker or find a mentor or a manager or someone who can help you do this well, even if it's your first time doing it. So now that you know the 3 steps to overcome imposter syndrome, the 4 red flags, and the 4 ways you can overcome it, are you ready to practice this starting today or tomorrow? If so, get ready for a marathon, because we are going to face imposter syndrome potentially every hour, every day, every week. Maybe it only comes up once every few months, but it's definitely going to keep coming up. And you'll continue to take these steps over and over and over as you progress in your career. And this is what being a brave leader looks like, and continuing to push yourself even as you learn new skills as a leader. And this is how you're going to push forward your professional career and win in the long run, so that your career and your success goes as far as possible. Q&A.
Thank you. That was pretty informative. Thank you so much for sharing that with our audience. That was pretty informative. I really enjoyed it. I like the use of the stick person in the whole presentation. I think it really is applicable to, okay, how do we get from just being perfect to experimenting, because that's usually the case. How do we get? I can rightfully say I've had my own imposter syndrome with even doing this. At first, I just sat there and said, oh, I really don't want to get on the camera. And I said, okay, you are always in front of students teaching. Why is it so hard to do this? So I just started doing it. Just started small and kept growing. So thank you so much for sharing this with us. I think this is really wonderful, really wonderful. So you spoke about your own imposter syndrome, and you gave us some examples, and you gave us some clear tactics that people can actually use and experiment with. But if you're making this career change, especially into tech, what do you think the tech industry, or for that matter, the startup industry, can do to help, I would say, even minorities or underrepresented person in the community, minorities and or women, feel more comfortable, feel more, okay, I can do this, I can step into it. This is okay for us to do. What would be some of your recommendation? What would be some insight that you have from your own vantage point?
I think I just lost you there, Glenn. Do you mind saying that last part of the question again? So what can...
Sorry about that. Right, that's fine. Right, we were just saying, you mentioned your own imposter syndrome. You gave us some clear tactics and examples. And my question to you is, especially in the tech industry where we are all in startup industry, what are some things you think the industry can do to make it more acceptable and easy for people to take these type of risks? Feel like they're a part of it, feel like it's okay for them to make mistakes, and feel a little bit more comfortable engaging in that industry.
Well, I will say that the startup industry wildly encourages experimentation. And some of the techniques that the startup industry uses to do this is one tool that's called minimum viable product, if folks have heard about it. Or even a prototype, where you can experiment with something before it's fully baked. Even if you want, for example, drawing something on a whiteboard instead of having an actual product to show a customer. So in some ways, the startup world tremendously supports experimentation, launching before you're ready. If there's a quote that says, if you're not embarrassed by your first product that you put out into the world, then you've launched way too late. So I think the startup world does embrace a lot of the techniques to overcome imposter syndrome. However, in the tech world, I do think in general, it can be very intimidating for folks who are new or coming into the tech world, because it is impossible to understand all the technology in the world and the rapid pace that technology is disrupting itself. it is, you could become an expert in one small sliver, and never even become a full expert after a lifetime of studying. So it can be intimidating to enter the tech world. So what I'd encourage any young professional to do is to know that any company, whether it's a tech company or not a tech company, any individual, whether they're already have been working in tech or have never worked in tech before, that they have the same kind of approach where the same success metrics will hold, which is if you're curious and if you're willing to try and experiment, generate results and improve, that willingness, that human willingness to kind of experiment, learn, improve, that's present whether you're in a tech company or not a tech company. So I think it is intimidating, and something that the tech world can do to improve that is just encourage more folks that have a non-traditional background to bring their perspective to the tech world. And I encourage you as young professionals to think of entering into a tech company, even if your background is in human resources, or if your background's in consulting or the humanities. Your perspective and insight will add tremendous value to the company, full stop. So even if you don't feel ready, you can learn on the job. You can learn by asking for help and getting mentors, and you will contribute a unique perspective that will help the company grow overall.
That was great. I really like that point. You can learn on the job. You can basically, that's a very, very valid point. I think a lot of people actually believe that if they want to get into tech or they want to be an entrepreneur, they should just start right away. But there's a way to gradually get into it by learning on the job. So as an educator, you have participated in Impact Hub, so we understand where that world works. And as an educator, what role do you think, I would say, whether it is a higher ed or even K through 12, high school, can play in preparing people to become entrepreneurs, especially given the robustness of entrepreneurship in today's world? What role do you think education can play in terms of preparing people to have this mindset around entrepreneurship?
Yep, I got it. Well, I mean, I think we're all continuous students and we're continuous learners. So I think the biggest role that education can play is instilling that curiosity and willingness to learn a new skill or topic. So the same mindset that you have as a student, where you want to experiment and take different classes and learn new topics, join a study group, all of these tactics that you use in school are very similar to what you'll use in a job. If you're curious about a certain industry, financial services. For example, I actually started working in financial services this year for the first time ever. I don't have a background working at a bank or financial institutions, but I do have a background working with startups, and I do have a background working with technology. And this year I've applied what disruptive startups are innovating in financial services. But financial services is new for me, so I had to put on my student cap and start to be really curious and read articles, talk to folks that are in the industry, working in the industry. What are your biggest pain points? What are your biggest challenges? And be really curious. So I think the skills that you learn as a learner, if you will, in school are the same curiosity skills that will serve you as you grow your professional development and won't keep you stuck in a box. You can be curious about new topics, new industries, new roles, new skill sets, as long as you're willing to learn the new skills, get with others, form those study groups, if you will, and practice and experiment. So I would like to see education be a little bit more hands-on and experimental, because in the real world, that's how you're going to learn, is you're going to do a mini event. Like you said, Glenn, you wanted to start a virtual event series and you were apprehensive about getting it started. But what you did was you just started small. You picked, one speaker, you put it out on LinkedIn and you saw, okay, what were the results? How did that go? How would I improve that the next time? So I'd like to see school keep that curiosity and learning, but make it a little bit more hands-on and experimental, because in your professional career, you're going to be doing a lot of hands-on experiments as you try out new skills and you grow and you stretch yourself.
That is fantastic. I find it pretty fascinating that you're mentioning some of the tools that is very applicable in terms of how do we get students and young professionals to start believing in entrepreneurship. Things like just having classes that are more experiential in its base and in its structure. That is, I find that there are so many students that are still, especially some of the students I engage with in the CUNY family, they're still quite reluctant to even go on LinkedIn and create a profile and set up a LinkedIn page and network. And these are some of the fundamental things that makes great founders. They're very good at networking, very good at understanding who to speak to, where to find their users. So it is essential that we can actually start with just creating this experiential mindset for these students, basically. So that's really great. And
Yeah,
I know
Glenn,
some of the top
actually, I
schools
have
do
a
this pretty well.
question. I have a question for you about that, Glenn, because I wonder if this is an example of, I don't know, but if this is an example of imposter syndrome. So when certain students don't feel they're ready to go on LinkedIn or don't want to have a profile on LinkedIn, I wonder what's holding them back. And if it is something around, well, I haven't worked yet, maybe, I don't have professional experience yet. So how can I go on LinkedIn because I don't have a resume to put there yet? This is a perfect example of imposter syndrome. So you don't feel ready yet to be on LinkedIn. But if you frame that instead of being fearful as being excited, well, I'm going to put my presence out there. I'm going to talk about some of the projects that I did in school and some of the skills that I have from maybe even volunteer work that I do, or even extracurricular work or a hobby. Maybe there's an arts and crafts hobby that you do. And I'm just going to put it out there and see what response I get. And I'm going to challenge myself to the third step, which is take action. I'm going to challenge myself to find 10 people to add to my LinkedIn community each week, and maybe even ask them for their feedback on my profile. What else would they add? Because your friends and colleagues often know you in a more objective way than you know yourself. And they can say, hey, you didn't mention this project that you worked on, which was really cool. That would be a great thing to add. So you can get advice from them. And this could be an example of if a student had a reservation about going on LinkedIn because they didn't feel their professional resume was ready yet, they could use the 3-step imposter syndrome process to get enough nerve and get themselves on LinkedIn, and it might lead to a job opportunity or a new connection, etc. So I think it could be an example.
No, that is great. Actually, I should play this section for my students. I teach a class in entrepreneurship at City College, and I probably play this section for them because one of the things that I did when we started talking, and they were so, I felt that you're absolutely right. It's imposter syndrome for most of them. They don't think they belong. So what I did was I said to them, why don't you do this? Why don't all of you send me a LinkedIn invite? Normally, I don't accept students' LinkedIn, I must admit. But I said to them, why don't all of you send me a LinkedIn invite? Create a nice message board in it and send me a LinkedIn invite. And I think that way it'd be easier for you to get access to LinkedIn. So I did that because I was really surprised as to how many of them just were not willing to do it and not willing to create a LinkedIn page. And so, I remember one student basically said to me, how does a young professional get credibility? And here you are, you're answering the question, right? Just start small. Ironically, and I said this to him, you'd be surprised how many students at Stanford University wouldn't ask that question at all. So I think that a lot of people who are in the minority communities, women, sometimes tend to ask that question, and they have to probably just do some of the examples that you were saying. Start really small. Start with people you know. There's this one person who he was working at this one company, and he said, "I'm so afraid to probably ask the people who are working for me And I said, that's okay. Don't look at your friend first and just said you're trying to build your professional network and just add that person. So I
Yes.
had them start adding me to their platform. Basically, it was kind of weird having students saying professor to me on LinkedIn, but it's something that I felt like was necessary and needed. So I'm really excited and happy that you kind of share that outline and talk about how they can make those initial steps to kind of start building those leeway to say, okay, I can add one person, I can add an X, and just keep building that professional network, because they are getting ready for jobs. And that's why I insisted, right? They're getting ready to look for jobs. And in the world we live in, that is basically going digital more and more, they have to get used to this concept of going out there and talking to people on these professional networks to basically continue building. So thank you so much for just highlighting that for us. And I will absolutely play this section in my class for the students. Just to kind of finish and wrap this up, from your vantage point, talk to us about where do you see the startup industry going, the tech industry, and how do you think more and more, and I want to focus more now and underrepresented people, minorities, and women really take the next steps to get involved. You mentioned how you didn't have a financial background, so you decided to go back to your MBA to make sure you could actually get that. But how can people make those smaller steps just to start going in? Probably some internship, probably just participate in different events. Give us some examples, some strategies that you think we can make over the next couple of years so that we can increase the number of people who are participating in the entrepreneurial startup ecosystem.
Well, the ecosystem itself still has a long way to go, and this is a call to the ecosystem. We are starting to see more and more tremendous role models who are more diverse, tremendous underrepresented founders who are having success and sharing their stories. But we need to hear and see more of that. So this is a call for the ecosystem, and also for any young professional who wants to get involved with startups or technology disruption. I would say try to find a role model. There are fewer diverse role models than there should be, but that's growing rapidly. And it can make a huge difference if you identify a human that you connect with who's vocally self-critical, who's vulnerable, who shares how maybe they had an unconventional path or what their individual journey is. It can be so helpful for motivating you and you being able to see yourself in their shoes. This happened for me, for example, when I was running Impact Hub. Our most popular event that we ran is called F Up Nights, which is a little cheeky, but it's a global event series, and it's where startup founders and successful business leaders come and share their stories of failure. And it was our most well-attended event because you saw people who on paper look very successful share how they failed miserably and how they got back up, dusted themselves off, and kept going. And it was so inspiring to hear from these individuals, and it's helped me feel like, hey, if they can fail, get back up and get back on the horse, so can I. So I would recommend that the industry in general have more vulnerability and share their stories and have more incredible founders and tech leaders, especially from diverse backgrounds, become role models and share their stories vocally. And then for you as young professionals, I would try to find, whether it's a local person who you admire, perhaps in your school system, or, a colleague or a friend of a friend, find a local role model or a global role model who you may never be able to meet, but you read about their story and they inspire you to kind of keep you going. That's made a huge difference for me. So that's one thing that I'll share. The second thing is, don't be afraid to fail. Failure is not a dead end road. If you start a job, and I've been rejected so many times. I mean, I've been rejected from so many jobs, and maybe I should share that, in my early description of the different jobs that I had. It may sound like one door kept opening after another, but in reality, I was rejected by many jobs that I've applied for and rejected by many schools that I applied to get into. it's okay. None of that stopped me. It just means you continue to apply for newer, different jobs. I would encourage you to just get started and not let failure stop you from continuing to try, because you will find something that works out. So that's the second tip I have, is have perseverance, and you will find that right opportunity if you keep trying.
Thank you so much. Those are really impactful points. I think we have to really understand. And I kind of, for a lot of young people, especially like I mentioned, minorities and females, sometimes we don't have that role model to look at. I said to somebody once, I wish when I was younger, I had that impactful role model to look at as well. So we learn a lot as we go, and we try and we fail and we make mistakes. I you know, I I have to say this, one of the organizations that really has been impactful in terms of how they create these essential startups, or is Y Combinator. And I think what we need is about 10 Y Combinators for, across the whole ecosystem, and just have even for females. I think females, there's an organization called Female Founders Collective. They're doing an awesome job. We need something similar for minorities, where we have this really strong network of people. Because what most people don't realize is what makes Y Combinator companies good is not necessarily that the founders are great. They're good people, but it's that they have this phenomenal network of people they can tap into to help them build. And I think we basically need that. I think a lot, especially in this underrepresented group, we need a lot more people to come together and say, we need to build a strong network of people that they can tap into, they can be okay with reaching out to and talk to. So thank you so much for saying that, because we don't have it right. Lots of people see us and they're like, oh, wow, this person's successful, but we are experimenting still. We're learning, we're trying to figure it out. We're failing, we're reaching out to people. I met you at the Impact Hub, you're both basically on the advisory board. And I just reached out to you and said, I really like your background. I'd love for you to speak. So I think we have to figure out how to create these, powerful network across the entire ecosystem. And as I said, the ecosystem is still growing. If you think about it, we're probably tapping into probably less than 10% of the world population in terms of what we can build. So we have a long way to keep building. So thank you so much for saying that.
Yeah, and about that, I mean, the tech industry has so much to benefit from bringing more diversity into the tech world. There's so much, we've barely scratched at the surface of what creative, innovative ideas are out there that each person has from their own unique experience. So I agree that we're barely tapping the surface, and the more people that get involved and join us, as tech continues to evolve, then the more say you have in what kind of products are created, what experiences people have when they use technology, and the more diversity we have in that, the better experiences and variety we'll be able to produce. So I love that point. And then one other point you just brought up, Glenn, that I can't resist saying, what's another great tip that I've used in the past, which has been so empowering to me? When I've wanted or needed a mentor, I have also offered to be a mentor. And it is so inspiring. Sometimes being a mentor, you learn more from your mentee than they learn from you. So any one of the young professionals listening to this session right now who are a part of the Workschool community or are a part of their own academic work community, find someone within your community that you can be a mentor to, and meet them once a month or once a week for half an hour and learn about them and their goals, listen to them, listen to their challenges, support them, help them brainstorm. And you may find that it really empowers you, and you learn a lot from your mentee. And it's this incredible notion that if you need something, so when you're feeling like you need guidance and you need a mentor, sometimes offering that to someone else also fills that for you. So it's a tip that anybody on this call can use, and they can do it through a formal mentorship program or informally reach out, for example, to a first year classmate if they're a senior, and reach out to somebody who's just starting in the program in the same major as them, and you say, hey, when I was getting started, I would have loved to have a senior to talk to. Would you want to meet, once a month and chat about your journey and how you're picking your classes, and I can help you and advise you. So just a tip that I've benefited from that others may want to try as well.
Thank you. That is really, really powerful. So, so become a mentor. So for all of you who are listening, become a mentor. Start mentoring because you learn from that process a better way. That is fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. Hey, Meaghan, thank you so much again for doing this, and thank you for being on our talk series, Work School Talk Series. Anyone who wants to learn more about what you do and how to reach you, can you just explain, tell them how can they know more about what you're doing? How can they learn more about you?
Yes. Well, please, per our topic on LinkedIn is the place to be as you're starting your professional journey and growing your professional journey. So I'd love to invite anyone to connect with me on LinkedIn. It's Meaghan Casey, Meaghan Casey, and I'm a startup partner manager at Amazon Web Services. So you can make sure you get the right Meaghan. Just connect with me, send me a message through there. Happy to talk with you, connect with you. And also perhaps for some of you who haven't formed a LinkedIn profile yet, you can get started with a simple shell, your photo, your name, something, the topic you're interested in pursuing professionally, and get some kind of a shell up there on LinkedIn, and then send out that message. So please reach out. And it's such a pleasure to share my journey. And if it helps one other person in the way that I've been helped by learning about imposter syndrome, then I think we can consider it a success.
Thank you so much. And if anyone who wants to learn more about Workschool, please reach us at Workschool, www.workschool.co, and you can find us on Instagram, you can find us on LinkedIn, Twitter. Again, Workschool, www.workschool.co. Thank you so much, and we had a great conversation. Thank you, Meaghan.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you all.